Welcome everybody to this meeting of talking about socialism. My name's Soraya Lawrence and I'll be facilitating the meeting this evening. Just to let everybody know, as well as saying welcome, some people I do know, some people I don't know. So if it's your first meeting, a particularly special welcome. Just to let everybody know, this meeting will be recorded. So if you don't want to be recorded, then you can turn your screen off. It will be uploaded to YouTube. And if you are watching this on YouTube, please subscribe. Press the subscriber button because then you will be notified of other videos of meetings that discussions we've had and when they become available. This evening, Wrack's going to introduce the discussion. Comrades will probably all know that former Labour Party prominent left-wing figures, activists, supporters, some are looking to create a new leftist, reformist, social democratic party, really in the image of Jeremy Corbyn's 2017-2019 manifestos. Although, interestingly enough, Corbyn himself is not calling for such a formation. But is the question we're going to discuss tonight and that Nick is going to introduce is a new Corbynite party the answer to the problems that face us, workers and their families in the current period? As I said, Wrack will introduce the discussion. He's going to speak for about 15 minutes and then everybody's free to make contributions. It usually start off with about 3 minutes each, just to try and get everybody to be able to speak. And of course, there's always a second time round. And if people don't speak, then of course people will be able to have even more time. But just so that you know the way we organise things to try and make it fair for everybody. Anyway, with that being said, Nick, if you want to kick off.
Thank you very much, Soraya. Thanks for attending, everybody. I don't think anybody will be here who doesn't know that there are lots of discussions taking place at a national level and probably amongst friends in the pub or in the workplace about what should be done among socialists, communists, workers to confront the state of the world. We are a group of Marxists and we have a particular view on things, but we recognise that we are a minority in the British Labour movement as communists, and even our brand of communism is perhaps a minority of a minority. The majority of left-wing activists, left-wing people who would call themselves socialists are probably best defined under the rubric or the title of Corbynists, Corbynites. Perhaps some won't like that expression, but it is one that the people who are now discussing a new left-wing party themselves use and adopt. So there's essentially two, if not more, discussions taking place. And I'm going to try to address two different strands of the argument. And I'm not going to have enough time to develop all the points fully. And I hope that people will come in and develop or contest things that I say, disagree with me. One of the things that we want to happen in these meetings is for people to say why they disagree, how they disagree, and how they disagree. And we can have a debate because it's very important. We as Marxists, as communists, as socialists who want a fundamental break with the capitalist system, have a particular view, and that is that we do not think that the interests of the working class can be met can be resolved by the continuation of capitalism. So our aim, our ultimate goal, is the abolition, the overthrow of the capitalist system, getting rid of the profit system. That's our starting point, if you like. If you're going to embark on a journey, unless you just want a bit of a wander and take in the scenery, it's a good idea to know where you want to go. You're going to get there quicker, and you're going to get there a little bit easier. You're going to avoid the pitfalls, the lay-bys, the way-bys, and so on. And so we set out at the start, our aim is to abolish capitalism. Now, we're a long way from that. We recognize that. There are others, and this is the majority view amongst the left in the labour movement and the trade unions, who would not agree with that, or who at least would hope that things could improve under the present system. We think that's a fundamental mistake. Capitalism is a society, or system rather, which is based on the exploitation of the working class. A small group, and it is tiny, a tiny group of people own the means of production. That's the resources in society, the wealth, the factories, the science, the technology, the transport, the water, the minerals under the ground, and so on. And they make their profit by exploiting labor, the workers who only have their labor power, their ability to work. Only by selling that can workers survive. And that's the very essence of capitalism. Now, we do not accept and reject the idea that capitalism can somehow be made to work in the interests of the working class. You just think about those two antagonistic interests, one to exploit workers for profit, and the other is to try to avoid being exploited. They're irreconcilable. And so our aim is to supersede this present system. If you look at the programme of Jeremy Corbyn, who is no doubt a left-wing and well-meaning individual, the programme, the manifesto of 2017 and 2019, was not a programme to change society. He referred to it, and others refer to it, as transformative. It is nothing of the sort. The programme, if you look at the two manifestos, doesn't challenge the existence of capitalism. It doesn't even name capitalism as the enemy of the working class. The manifesto essentially was I would argue, a milder version of what used to exist in the 70s and the 80s under Tony Benn and others, what was then called the alternative economic strategy. But even that more radical left-wing programme did not fundamentally challenge the nature of an existence of capitalism. And in the Labour Party and the trade unions and that sort of circle, people will point back to the 1945 Labour government and the reforms that it is that 5 minutes gone or 5 minutes left?
10 minutes left.
Thank you. The Labour government of 1945, which was in a sense more radical still than the alternative economic strategy, it did introduce a series of quite wide-ranging reforms to do with the welfare state, housing, the health, the National Health Service, and so on. But it still did not challenge the capitalist system. It extended ownership to the state, but the point was it was ownership by the capitalist state. And those services and those sections of the economy that were run as nationalized industries essentially subsidized the public sector to allow for the continued existence of the profit-making capitalist economy. So we do not want to repeat the alternative economic strategy or even for that matter, the 1945 Labour government reforms. We want to see the abolition of capitalism. Nationalisation, in our opinion, it does not mean socialism. Socialism is a society that comes after capitalism has been abolished. We call it socialism or communism. We use the same words to describe the same thing, different words rather, to describe the same thing. But it's a society in which the resources of the world are owned in common. And they're planned democratically by everybody in the interests of everybody. In socialism, communism, you choose the word, everybody would work to the best of their ability. Everybody, therefore, would be a worker. There would be no bosses. Classes would be abolished. And the resources of society would be democratically planned to meet the needs of everyone. So that's the sort of society that we want and that we're aiming for. And all of the ills of the present system, whether it's malnutrition, lack of access to water, poverty, inequality, climate catastrophe, wars, austerity, are all products of the capitalist profit system. And if we want to abolish any or all of those diseases, capitalist diseases, we have to get rid of the cause. And therefore, anything that aims at less than that, we reject as a solution. And that's why we do not advocate and don't argue for what is called variously a left-wing party. What do we mean by left-wing? A radical party. What do we mean by radical? A workers' party, unless it's described as being a party that calls for the end of capitalism. So we have to be careful about the words that we use and how we mean them. What do we mean when we say radical? What do we mean when we say left-wing? I would argue that the socialism of Jeremy Corbyn, I would use the term social democratic ideas to describe that, or reformism, basically the idea that you can reform capitalism into doing what it is not designed to do. Of course, we fight for reforms. We don't oppose or stand aside from the fight for reforms, but we link the struggle for reforms to the need to change society overall. What we oppose is the idea, the ultimate goal simply of reforming a system which can't be reformed into its opposite. And therefore, if we look at what's happening at the moment, people will know, I'm sure, that there are discussions taking place under the name of collective or the collective. And various organisations have come together, and it defines itself as Corbynism. So I'm quoting from its website. It's worthwhile going to the website. It says that a collective is driven by the spirit of Corbynism that can now be seen in the UK-wide mobilisation at all levels in opposition to Labour's rightward and authoritarian turn. Well, we would share the dismay and the opposition to the rightward shift in Labour and the authoritarianism represented by Starmer and his cohorts. But we reject the idea that Corbynism is the solution to that. If you look at some of the organisations that are involved, you've got, I mean, some of them I didn't really know. I had to look them up. Assemble, For the Many, Harrow Independence, Just Stop Oil, Liverpool Community Independence, Reliance, Southport Community Independence, the Muslim vote, Transform, which I think is a coming together of Left Unity, the Breakthrough Party, and perhaps the Liverpool Community Independence as well, Tusk. So there's a whole array of organisations involved there, and probably with the exception of the Socialist Party, none of those organisations are Marxist or socialist in the way that I've been using the term. Now, if people who don't agree with the aim of communism or socialism want to form a party, that's perfectly proper. They ought to form that party. They ought to be organised and fight for their ideas. In fact, if they were organised and formed that party, we'd have a body of people with whom to engage and debate and discuss and disagree with. But Marxists, in my opinion, should not be giving their time, their effort, their money, their energy to building a party that will have a programme which is different from and clashes with the programme of a fundamental change in society. So that's one area of debate. Should Marxists participate in building, well, first of all, in creating, and then in building such a party? And there are Marxists, I think the anti-capitalist resistance would be one group, who see that the way forward is to participate in what might be called a broad left party, where Marxists coexist with reformists. But the problem there is that in spending time and energy in building that party, you are inevitably and essentially subordinating the program of revolutionary fundamental change to that of the attempt to reform capitalism. There are other organizations, I say Counterfire, the SWP, who seem to have the approach of supporting a broad left party whilst maintaining their position as independent revolutionary Marxist organizations. I'm running out of time, or I've run out of time, and I'm not going to be able to develop the point. Even though we are small, we think it far more important that those of us who describe ourselves as communists or socialists who want a fundamental break with the present system, those of us who believe in that, even if we're a minority of a minority, we need to come together to try to form the nucleus, the basis for a new democratic mass communist party. If we do not advocate boldly our ideas, our program, then nobody will. And the ideas of communism will inevitably suffer, they will dwindle, and we will make no progress whatsoever. If we want to change society for ourselves, our children and our grandchildren, we need to start building for that new mass democratic communist party now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nick. That was excellent and very good timekeeping as well. So anybody who wants to ask a question or make a contribution, if you can put your either your real hand or a virtual hand up, which you can find in the React section, where there's an option to raise a hand, and then I can call you in. And it's questions, disagreements, whatever you like. That's why we're having the discussion. Do comrades think that there's any need to have a party? Should we all just get together with people who think that things are bad and just have single issue campaigns? What do people think? Kirsty, let me just, can you unmute yourself?
Good
Yeah,
evening, Soraya.
yeah, great.
Can
Yeah,
you hear me all right?
that's fine, lovely.
It's just a wee question or a statement. It's all very well to get these parties of the left, PIA, Corbyn system parties. We have to have ways to help the people just now a lot of people in this country are actually really struggling, and we don't want it 5 years' time down the line when it's going to be even worse for other people, and it's mainly like with the elderly, with the pensions, and also housing, and also the disabled, and the government is actually coming down really hard on those people, and it's not going to tax the non-doms or the tax avoidance ones, and that's just, I just want to know what other people's thoughts on that are, but that's me anyway.
Thanks
Thanks,
very much.
Maria.
Yes. So, what do people think about the attacks that the government is carrying out on all sections of working people? And what about the position on, if I'm not misrepresenting what Kirsty was asking, on they won't tax and come down hard on non-doms and things like that and taxation. Sandy, I can see your hand, and then Chris, I can see your hand after that. So Sandy, fire away.
Well, I think that the situation we're in is that there obviously has to be a response from the working class, because we're increasing austerity combined with a war drive that is looking more and more dangerous. And with Trump in the White House, reaction is certainly taking a flip upwards, and it's something that we have to confront. In terms of, I was really pleased to hear that there is an attempt to regroup a Democratic Communist Party or a communist unity group and bring various comrades together. I think that's a very positive thing. All I would caution, because of years of experience, is we don't need another sect. We need an organisation that actually intervenes in the class struggle to support and strengthen the working class. I don't agree with the counterposition of that to the collective. I think it's quite possible to say, of course, the priority is building a communist party, but I think it's also important to say we really need a voice for workers at the moment in a situation where reaction, reform party is so dominant, and to have a broad left party that we can organise within while having our own programme, etc. I think that would be a step forward. It could be an ad hoc thing or whatever, but it would mean that we would be standing candidates and would be building up spokespeople that can present a pro-working class, anti-war position. And I don't think the small regroupment of communists could do that at the moment, but it's still a good thing and it's a priority. But a broader left party, I don't think we should oppose it. I think we have to have a party that speaks up for workers and fights back for workers on a mass scale. And that might be, a step towards that. Certainly don't agree with the social democratic programme. I think that's been shown. We'll have to draw lessons from common experience, but I don't want to speak too much, so I'll end it there. But I think you can have both, but I do welcome the forging communist unity attempt. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Andy. Sorry, Sandy. I haven't been well. That's my excuse. Chris, next, followed by Peter Kennedy.
Thanks, comrades. I agree with what most of Nick has said, so I try not to repeat him too much. I think, the world that we are in, and Sandy talks about it a little bit just then, we are faced with a world of multiple crises, intractable crises under capitalism. We have the horrors of climate change that have been unfolded around the world. We've seen the fires in America and what have you. We've got wars that are raging in Sudan, Myanmar, Ukraine, and the Middle East. They don't look like to be subsiding anytime soon. We've got the economic and the political crisis in the West and across other parts of the world, in which, obviously, as Sandy's pointed out, living standards are going down. And that is all coupled with attacks on our democratic rights as well. The right to protest, freedom of speech, and what can be said and what can be thought about in individuals' heads. We've seen climate activists from Just Stop Oil being arrested just for the very idea of thinking about protesting a few months ago. So I think that the idea that the answer for all of this is a Corbynite party or a broad left party or what have you, for me is the political equivalent of rearranging, deck chairs on the Titanic. What we really need is a new vessel, a new future, a communist future. And I think what we need to avoid is burying all of these problems that we have with the revolutionary left, the Marxist left, whatever you want to call it, into the foundations of a new party, because we'll bake in all of those sex problems, all of those issues. So, the idea of communists uniting as a single force is important, because then that gives us the strength and the strong foundations that we need to go out, as Sandy said, go out as class fighters and win those battles that we need to across our movement and across society. We need a party that is based on the working class majority. We need to be democratic. And what do we mean by that? It's not just voting conferences every now and again. It has to really be baked into all of the local structures. It can't just be stitch-ups at the top, which I think what has been the case in the attempts that seem to be taking place at the moment. People are scrabbling around, having nice little dinner parties between the great and the good, or people who perceive themselves to be the great and the good, and trying to pull together a new broad left formation based on their celebrity or what have you. And we need to be, clear that we want a democratic process with open debate on the future of, the political future of our movement. And it needs to be, as Nick has said, needs to name that alternative. It needs to name the future. I would say that's communism, socialism, whatever whatever way you want to call it. And we need unity under clear principles. We're internationalists, we're anti-imperialists. As I said, we're democratic. We also need a party that is non-ideological, a party that seeks to bring in all communists, all workers and class fighters under the banner of the working class coming to power. And if that's what we aim for, and that's within our grasps in the medium term, then we will set out to build a party that is, able to change society. And I think that's what we should be aiming for. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you very much. That's brilliant. Peter Kennedy, please, followed by Bryce. And just before I start you, Peter, there'd been a couple of posts on the chat, and I just wanted to ask Ian, who posted something, if he would like to speak to that, or whether he just wants me to read it out, and he can post whilst have a think about that whilst others are speaking. Peter, thank you. Oh, Peter, I can't hear you. Can you turn it? And you aren't muted, so I'm not quite sure. Try speaking. Your volume?
Can't hear.
Do you need to turn your volume up, Peter? Can't hear you at all, not even faintly.
Sometimes,
go on, Nick.
Sometimes it's a problem with what your computer settings are. If you go to the settings for your Zoom, you can maybe.
How's that now?
Oh,
Yes.
fantastic. Okay. Right, fire away. Start again.
Yeah. Yeah, you were right, Nick. I went to my computer settings. So, yeah, I agree with the fundamentals, Nick, and what you're saying. The Labour Party has been a problem for the left for generations now. It's been a kind of quagmire, if you like, for the left themselves. So if you enter the Labour Party, you make too many compromises, and the way it functions within capitalism is to as a kind of broad church, a broad tent, if you like, is to disarm the working class, disarm any more revolutionary politics or more radical politics. And it seems to make them fit the era within which capitalism exists. So you mentioned the social democratic of old, 1945, and there was a particular response from the Labour Party then, and that was, as you mentioned, to basically sustain capitalism in in its development, at that time after the war, and do what it took to revive it, and that required elements of the left establishment to pull in together to to work with the Labour Party and bolster that project of reviving capitalism. And after that kind of ended in the 70s, for reasons probably everyone knows empirically, from the oil crisis to the profit crisis and so on, and the development of a kind of economically powerful working class in the UK, at least, and maybe other countries, then we had the arrival of Thatcherism and a transformation of Labour into a very different party from Blair to the Starmerite Labour Party right now. So we know that it evolves in response to capitalist needs, and it's a bulwark, it's a quagmire for any serious working party that is committed to the end of capitalism. One of the downsides of Corbynism is that it sucked in probably a lot of Marxists as well, and that wasn't always to the good. So in that respect, and it's something I've always thought about anyway, that we do need an independent Marxist party, but at the same time, that's going to take a bit of uniting and stitching together. And there's various parties about that call themselves Marxist. So there's a complexity there overcoming the differences. Part of this forging of a unity is maybe may in the future make inroads towards that. But I'm thinking as well that the likes of the collective socialist trade union alliance kind of things that's emerging, and the other groups that Nick mentioned in that list, then they're not going to go away because we're not there, and in a way they're acting as a kind of a vehicle to maybe take some of the strength away from the Labour Party in the future if they did prosper, because many of them would have been in the Labour Party and given it that left-wing veneer of coverage, when the Labour has to go left now and again, has to swing left. If they're outside of the party and building their own party, then that's all to the good, because it weakens the Labour Party's basis in Parliament and basis outside within the trade unions. And I think it's fertile ground for a Marxist party to work with those people to generate Marxist ideas which can take their struggles forward. So yes, they may be reformist in their policies and strategies, and they may want to kind of get the best deal for the working class possible within capitalism, which we would disagree with. But our policies should be forming around how to take those policies in a more radical direction. So the good thing about having an independent party is that you can afford to enter these organisations. You can afford to work with people. We work along as workers every day, along people with different persuasions, different opinions, and as Marxists, we're always trying to influence them. So it shouldn't really make any difference if those people outside of the workplace enter different parties that we consider reformist, but have a genuine grievance against capitalism and are genuinely seeking to try to overcome some of the the exploitation that they're experiencing at the moment, and other things going on in the world which they totally disagree with. Just the last point, the international is important as well. And one of the things that Marxists are kind of, I would say a Marxist party should be working to is having a kind of umbrella unity of forging internationally as well, because that's where we can have exert a lot more leverage than the nationally based reformist parties, because many of those reformist parties are based around the national will, making the working class in their own particular backyard, making improvements in their lives. And so, if you look back to the Marxist, the internationals which Marx was a part of, that was a broad movement, and it was international for a purpose, because it wanted to bring together all the best ideas and all the knowledge of concrete disputes amongst reformists, lefty reformists that were going on at the time, and forge some new ideas to take back into those parties, or into their own socialist parties. So I think there's need for a more dialectical approach to it.
Thanks very much, Peter. That's great. Before I call in Bryce, and then I've got L. Parker after that. Just a couple of things that have been posted. So Ian posted, agree with Sandy, communists can take part in collective both to build it as a mass alternative to the reform surge and to push for a better programme than Momentum Mark II. And Christine agreed with that. So ask people to think about that, whether they agree. And then there's a question from Joe Davison. I was wondering how Nick would compare collective to earlier examples such as respect and left unity. Okay, so thanks for those questions. And I call Bryce in now, please.
Yeah, I do think that a lot of Corbynistas are similar to the democratic socialists Engels describes in Principles of Communism. They have a critique of capitalism but are politically naive. They don't really have a strategy that goes beyond winning reforms, so they adopt a reformist program and they don't work towards the mass politics needed for a socialist project to combat the threat of a capitalist class and capitalist state. I think communists can organise and fight for their politics in broad left parties. Lenin argued that the CPGB should join Labour, which they applied to do so, but were rejected. And Marxist Unity Group have become a very impressive organisation working within the Democratic Socialists of America. But communists have to organise as a communist faction, which has been my problem in Transform, and those parties have to be democratic. I'm sceptical about collective because they're secretive and bureaucratic. I don't think they're a serious political project beyond trading on the popularity of Corbyn's name, given that they've been having secret meetings for 2 years and are only just getting towards an interim constitution. Though I do hope something becomes of it.
Oh, thanks very much. That's a very interesting contribution. Thank you. L. Parker, please.
Oh yeah, sorry, that's Lawrence Parker. Sorry.
Sorry, Lawrence. It's only because I couldn't see.
No, it's fine. Yes, it's just yeah, so too lazy to type. So thank you very much, and thank you for the introduction by Nick, which I agreed with most of. I just wanted to raise up the question about comrades seem to assume a lot. I think whether you work or whether you don't work in broad left formations like collective, I just think it's a tactical question, and given that if you're building a mass communist party, you're not building a castle where you instantly raise the drawbridge on the outer world. I think it's quite legitimate to have that as a tactic of working. There's all sorts of tactics that you can use, and that needs to be decided in the concrete. So I'm not arguing that we just stand outside and throw mud or flick V signs or any of that type of stuff. I do think comrades are slightly naive about, and I mean this in a polite way, about the kind of space that you might find within those organizations to argue for whatever your politics might be. I'm just talking as someone who's been in the 90s and beyond, who was in quite a few of these kind of broad left kind of formations. And the classic example would be you can name others, but Scargill's Socialist Labour Party was the obvious kind of example when that came together in the mid-90s as a sort of broad left kind of old Labour reasserting itself, that had lots and lots of people in it who probably the majority of the organisation were Marxists of one stripe or communists or Trotskyists of one type or another. But what you kind of find in those broad left organisations is that the leadership of the great and the good, as Chris has quite a kind of aptly kind of described, these people who kind of seek to kind of broker these organizations and run this, to keep them broad, they have to start like uh, 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 stopping the circulation of like Marxist ideas, of revolutionary ideas, because they want to remain broad. And there's this idea that you'll put off ordinary people if Marxists are involved. And these arguments have been rehearsed across many broad left formations, and they actually restrict the space. And the most grotesque example of that, of course, was in Momentum, when it was owned by one individual. The very imperfect democracy that existed at the beginning of it was then completely truncated with the apparent agreement of Corbyn and John McDonnell and figures like that to keep to this precisely to this idea of keep it broad. Marxists won't be necessarily welcome with open arms by all elements of that, and as communists, we should, be aware of that, and take cognizance of that, because those projects, as Nick has indicated, are aimed at something different. They're aimed at ameliorating some of the effects of capitalism. Therefore, they've got a different class basis to what will be of a communist party. And just the final point that I'm going to make is this collective thing, the idea of Corbynism and Corbyn. I mean, it's a slightly odd personality cult in that way, because actually the personality who's meant to be leading this on a big white horse, Jeremy Corbyn, so far as I can tell, and I'm relying really on Carla Roberts' articles in the Weekly Worker, I don't know, I haven't been involved in it, but Jeremy Corbyn's not very interested in these types of organizations anyway. And Jeremy Corbyn's thing seemed to me to be more of a, and his election campaign seemed to be a much more broader, what I would actually call a much more straightforward liberal type politics of social justice and a kind of the ethical politics that he's also had. Jeremy Corbyn did, when he was leader of the Labour Party, didn't talk about socialism very much. Uh, you know, um, there was no mention of socialism. There was no mention of capitalism. It was for the many, not the few. But what that actually kind of meant, it meant capitalism for the many, not for the few. And obviously, as we know, capitalism can't be for the many. It's just it's an impossibility. But it is a slightly odd cult if we're reviving Corbyn's politics when he's not that interested in that project either. And I do think that although like left reformism and broad left politics, the idea of that hasn't died, and it won't die while capitalism still exists, I suspect. But I think the moment of Corbyn has kind of passed, really. Do we really think there's going to be millions of people in a field shouting, "Oh, Jeremy Corbyn," like next year? I mean, I doubt that somehow. There's clearly groups of people who genuinely like him, and they share his politics of a kind of world with a liberal social conscience, and a lot of those people are decent people, and I think Jeremy's a decent person, or I do know a little bit, and he's a decent person. But if I was hard pushed, would I say he's a socialist? I'm not sure. He's a Labour socialist of some description, but I'm not sure what that is anymore in the modern world. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Lawrence. Appreciate that. So at the moment, I don't have any other hands up. So I don't know, Nick, do you want to come in on some of the questions that have been asked? And maybe that will, and then if people want to have a think about that and come in, people who haven't spoken before, and also people who have spoken before, seeing what's on the, yeah, at the moment I can't see any other hands up. So Nick, do you want to come back for a bit?
Sure, if there's nobody else. And clearly this is a massive subject. I mean, we could debate it all evening, although some of us have to work after this meeting, and others have got no doubt got other things to do. But the argument that I'm trying to put forward is not at all that we ignore what happens elsewhere in the labour movement. In fact, communists should pay attention to everything that happens in the labour movement, in the working class, and should try to intervene. My starting point is that we as communists, that is, people that want to abolish capitalism and create the basis for a new society, we as communists need to argue that from the mountaintop. And if we lower our banner or zip our mouths, well, who's going to argue for it? It's the only solution that exists. It's the only possible way out of the disasters that face the working class on a daily basis, and particularly if you look internationally. So what I find difficult to understand, and I oppose completely, is those Marxists who go into broad left organizations and basically vote against Marxist politics on the basis that we'll put people off, we'll frighten them. So when you have a majority in a party, for example, in Left Unity, it seemed to me that Left Unity, if the majority of people, which included people that call themselves Marxists, voted for a Marxist program, that would have been achieved. So actually people are voting against the very program that they say they understand is the only way forward. Now, of course, people that aren't Marxists, they may be, as Bryce said, naive socialists and understand that capitalism is an abomination, but they don't know how to get there. We communists need to present the answer to that question. And the question, therefore, and I agree with Lawrence and a number of other comrades, how we take our ideas to the working class and where we work is a tactic to be decided, in my opinion, once we have agreed, once we've come together as communists and decided that we're going to have our own party, and this is what we're going to argue for. And then the question is, well, where do we go? And if we're small, we may decide that our forces are best put to one place, or if we're a much larger, we may be able to do more than that and go to several places. And we might have, you might work in another organization. You might do different types of work. So those are tactical issues. But the starting point for me is, and I'm addressing this to people who agree that what we need is to abolish capitalism, is why are we not in the same organization? Why are we not in the same communist organization? And I address that to members in what I would call the various revolutionary socialist organizations. I was a long-term member of the Militant. But the Socialist Party now sees itself as the party. If you look at the SWP, it sees itself as the party. If you look at the Revolutionary Communist Party, the same. If you look at Counterfire, the same. Whereas what we're arguing is that all of the Marxists ought to be in the same organization, rather than duplicating what we're saying, rather than fighting for the same sort of space. Let's have an organization that argues for the abolition of capitalism, in which there is complete democratic debate, discussion, and in which decisions are made democratically, and we implement those decisions. Now, those people on, if you like, the reformist left of the movement, they should form a party. I would encourage them to form that party. I would not encourage Marxists to set about organizing and constructing that party. Marxists should be doing what we're trying to do in the small forces of the Forging Communist Unity discussion, and that is to bring Marxists together. Once we're together, it may be that we decide, collective might be a place to work. I don't know. Bryce raised Lenin and his attitude towards the Labour Party. That would be a discussion in the present situation. Personally, I don't agree with the MUG, Marxist Unity Group, working in the Democratic Socialists of America, but that's another discussion. I agreed with what Lawrence said, a lot of what Peter said, what Chris said. I haven't addressed what Kirsty said, but I think it's extremely important that communists are the most militant, or ought to be the most militant, activists in the working class, taking up the struggles of the working class, whether that's about health, whether it's about care for the elderly, whether it's about the disabled. We should be at the forefront. The problem is that we're not organised well enough. We're divided among several different parties, all turning up with the same leaflets under different banners, different placards with different names on it. We would be much more effective and have a much better intervention and ability to influence the movement if we were united. But of course, we can't just be an organisation that has good ideas, writes interesting articles, or presents, interesting, hopefully, podcasts or discussions. We have to be active. Ideas without activity is useless. So we have to take the ideas to the workers. We have to go to the workers with our ideas, but we have to be involved in their struggles. I'm going to leave it there for the moment and hope other people can come in and develop more points.
Thanks, Nick. So Andy, you've got sorry, I keep doing it. I'm sorry, Sandy. And I know you. There's no excuse. I'm not well. That's my excuse, Sandy. Anyway, fire away. Thanks.
Okay. I mean, the first point about Corbynism is that where the left, the communists and socialists, right to join when Corbyn won the leadership, or it was becoming apparent he won the leadership, where was it right to join the Labour Party? I think it was. It was a class struggle. We were fighting against the elements that wanted to maintain the Labour Party as a party of the capitalist order, and we were right to engage in that struggle to try and stop that. Corbyn was a big disappointment. I mean, you can look at the failures of the left reformists in that struggle. We ended up not only getting defeated by the left getting thrown out of the Labour Party and the Labour Party becoming a very pro-war, pro-capitalist without any opposition, but we also, the forces that were attracted to Corbynism have really dispersed to the wind. We didn't organise that force to create a mass socialist party moving to the left, right? Now, it's late in the day. This collective, I really don't have a lot of contact with it. It seems, there are some useful groups involved in it. If it takes a positive step forward in saying we want to create a party that stands for the working class and against war and against the imperialist war drive and support Palestine, the central issues of the class struggle, which are always world issues, the central issues of the class struggle against imperialism, if they come forward and are willing to build a party like that, I think communists would be willing to work with them and be open about our politics, not secret factions or hiding it. We think a communist party is needed, an international communist party is needed, but we'll work with anyone together to try and advance the interests of the working class. And it would be in the interests of the working class if we stopped all aid to Israel, if we supported the Palestinian struggle for freedom, if we opposed the war drive against Russia and Ukraine. There's a whole list of anti-imperialist policies that are absolutely central. And if we can work with other people in that, great. I do think it's really good that you're thinking of this communist unity project. I would say that I think the best form of unity is within the class struggle, when comrades are united together in a struggle against the capitalist class, even on just political matters, like against the wars that Trump and Stammer are promoting throughout the world and the regime change operations. Anti-imperialism has to be central to any new communist unity. But I do think it's a good step forward. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sandy. Can't see any other hands up. It's an intro. If I can just say a couple of words myself, I think it's really important, the discussions that talking about socialism has been involved in and is involved in, because I think it's not that I want to be in some separate little group, and I have, as other comrades have been, in respect, in socialist unity, you name it. I've tried to be a part to building something bigger, because obviously we're not proclaiming ourselves as the party of the work, the new communist party, the party of the working class, but it's how do you get there, and how do you, and I'd be interested in hearing comrades' views. I mean, obviously, comrades who've spoken, but other comrades, what do you do when you've got small forces? And I mean, I was somebody who rejoined the Labour Party when Corbyn was elected as the leader. I didn't have any illusions in Corbyn, because knowing what he was, I think a sincere reformist, but that his position had inspired people to flood into the party, and I think it was absolutely right to be in the party, to get involved and discuss with those people. But also, from a personal point of view, it was getting not for the sake of it, but being active in the party, and being elected to various positions in my branch and also in the constituency. You then dedicated your time to building the Labour Party, which I do not and have never thought was a socialist and was going to be fighting for communism in this country. It's not fighting to end capitalism. So it's that question of when you've got few resources, what are you best doing? And I'm not suggesting that you don't, because as a matter of course, you are going to be involved in the oppositions to the horrendous wars that are taking place, the attacks on all of us, defending the health service, and all of that. Of course, that's part of our everyday ID, isn't it? But it's just in terms of beyond that. I'm not sure I know the answer. Well, I think that it is that we need, without it being proclaiming, but to build something a bit bigger, and for that to be arguing for the need for a proper workers' party, not just here but throughout the world, is an important thing to do, and it's trying to marry those two things. And I agree with what I think it was Peter was saying about it's important to have the forces to be able to stand and so forth in elections, to put forward the arguments. Anyway, don't want to abuse my position too much. You've got your hand up again, so far away.
Yeah, just a quick point, which I was reflecting on when people were giving their views. When we, because the same with me, when Corbyn come about, then it was a breath of fresh air, 2015. So I joined the Labour Party. One, it was cheap because it was about £1 or something for a ticket, for a monthly membership, or even a year, I can't remember now. But when I went to a couple of the Labour Party gatherings, then I could spot the Marxists with, have a chat about why we're there, and some obvious reasons. It was an interesting time. We wanted to see what was going on, and it was the first sign of like any tilt towards like old-fashioned social democratic policies, no matter how policy-like they were in your relative terms to 1945. But there was no. If it wasn't isolated Marxists was meeting, it was Marxists from particular Marxist parties, and they all had their own different takes on why they were there. And a lot of the time, I'm not just, having a go, but it would be a membership building exercise, because the Labour Party has turned towards left-wing ideas of Corbyn. It was fertile ground for gathering more membership for the individual Marxist stroke socialist parties. And that gets me thinking that, well, one of the positives of trying to form some sort of unity, some sort of network, if it's not a party straight away, is to try and break down that kind of tendency, either to go in isolated, or to go in as different kind of Marxist parties seeking to draw on, raise membership. And that unity could be based on building a cadre which works towards developing a coherent understanding of capitalism, what we're fighting, and a coherent understanding of what comes after, because we are all about abolishing capitalism, but not to bring in what one book phrased as techno-feudalism. We want to bring in communism, so we have to be cognizant of what that means, as well as a set of ideas which can be attractive to people. And we have to have a really well drilled understanding, a common understanding that can kind of be, talked through and discussed, of where capitalism is right now, what its forces are, where its weaknesses are, and then building that as well, and politically too.
Right, Peter, I'm really sorry
Okay.
to cut across you. It's just I'm trying to keep one eye on the time, and suddenly I've got another two hands that are up. So apologies for if that's abrupt, and I do appreciate what you were saying. I've got Lawrence and Chris who want to speak. So if anybody who hasn't spoken who'd like to put their hand up, I've also got. I'm just going to read this out. Joe Davison, the talk of left rapprochement is very promising, but what would the basis of this unity be? Programmatic unity? Would it allow factions? And then Jeff Barr has posted, the Socialist Workers' Party, the Socialist Party, etc., are not parties. They are they are political religious sects. They are barriers to progress. So, having just read that out, oh, wait a minute, I've lost Lawrence's. Okay, I don't know.
I'd still like to
Oh, you're
speak.
there. Sorry,
I
I'm
thought
so
you'd
sorry,
saw
Lawrence.
me. Yeah,
Yes, no, I
that's all
did
right.
see you. It's just because your hand went down, I
I
thought I'd
thought
lost you.
I thought you'd recognise me, so I took it down. So yeah.
No, that's
Okay.
great. Brilliant, Lawrence. Thanks.
Okay. I'll just be very quick. Comrades have talked about collective, like becoming a kind of coherent, kind of anti-imperialist kind of force. I would be delighted if there was another force appeared like that. That would be positive. But from what I understand of the internal dynamics of some of the people around collective, there's all sorts of positions. There's some people within collective, for example, who support the NATO war in Ukraine. I don't think personally, I would find that quite difficult to accept. And I think you're going to find a range of positions. And I think by trying to remain broad, they'll probably have to avoid some of those questions. The question about what you do as a small group is a really interesting one. And I do think there is a certain dynamic of small groups coming together and undertaking, because there's certain things you have to do as an organization, produce publications, host meetings, try and build your forces that breed a sort of collective kind of identity. But then I do think it is important to try and do something that also looks outward from the beginning. But I do think you have to kind of pick what you work on. I've been in small groups in the past, Workers' Power, CPGB, Weekly Worker, where they've tried to do everything. Workers' Power used to involve itself in absolutely everything, trade union kind of stuff, protests, absolutely everything. What it actually did was fragment our branch, because obviously we weren't all in. I wasn't in a union, I was a student, and but they were all in different unions. But what it actually, this hyperactivity tended to fragment. But I think that they're really interesting questions, and I don't have a pat answer to that. But I do think you have to be quite careful about what you do, and you have to pick things to build and work on very slowly and very kind of thoughtfully. I kind of think, unless you suddenly have 100,000 people joining you, then which I hope will happen, and then you have a completely different problem because then you are thinking about trade union work, Labour Party work, working collective, and so on. That's it.
Thanks very much, Lawrence. Chris.
Thanks. I'll try not to repeat anything anyone else says, but largely agree with what Nick and then Lawrence and yourself have said. I think it's definitely possible to do both, and it is a tactical question, as comrades have already said. What I would throw into that is that we do have a wealth of experience of these parties and these formations and our roles in them. Lawrence has spoke about the Socialist Labour Party, but we do have a much longer history, a much more international level of experience as well to add into all of this, 100 plus years of it. And I think, obviously the bigger ones for us in Europe in recent years have been Syriza. And one of the experiences of the revolutionary left, the communists within that, who did many of the things that Nick and others have spoken about, self-censored, subordinated the program of the working class coming to power to the right in order to maintain unity. What happened when it all fell apart for Syriza because the right was in the driving seat, even if they were in a numerical majority, both within the party and amongst the broader working class, were managed to steer the party, steer the insurgent movement in Greece into the government, into administering capitalism, administering austerity. And what happened there, which I'm sure many of us are aware of, is that it became very too late for the left, the revolutionary left, the communist left that was in Syriza to say, that's not us, not me, Gov. I'm not responsible for that. And of course, the Greek working class rightly said, no, you're all in it together, and condemn them at the ballot paper when the ballot box when the elections did come round. We had other examples. The Die Linke, I think, was another good example of what happens. Wanting to administer capitalism regionally, wanting to support the German state in its war aims in Ukraine and what have you. So often these parties do seem like we do get a temporary unity, like we did with the Socialist Alliance, with the SLP, with what have you. But actually, the longer term prospects of unity, the longer term possibility of creating an anti-capitalist alternative, actually falls apart because baked in at the very beginning is that disunity, is the idea that the right should be running the show, even when the left is the numerical majority. We saw that in left unity, so like a one step forwards, two step back. I mean, what we really should be aiming for is class independence. And, if we are for working class politics, even in a form that maybe we wouldn't necessarily perfectly want to appear, whether it's a left reformist, what have you, then we need to hold on to the idea and fight for the idea that any formation that comes out has to be for, extreme opposition to the state, has to be for the transformation of society away from capitalism towards communism, and it can't be just simply, nice things for nice people or slightly more left than the Greens or a rehashing of Corbynism.
Thanks very much, Chris. Nick, before I call you in, because nobody else has their hand up, but I can see Jenny has posted something and Jeff has responded to it. Now, Jenny, I don't know if you want me to just read it out or if you wanted to. Okay, all right. So Jenny posted, I admire the SWP because for all my life I've seen them on picket lines and at every major demonstration and workers' struggle. But what does concern me is the condemnation I have heard some SWP members make about other revolutionary parties. It's almost as if they condemn them more than the reformist parties. I find this so disappointing and frustrating. The left seems to fight amongst itself so much, we will get nowhere without unity. And Jeff said, I think that's the problem, Jenny. The point of the dynamism is to build a sect, not a whole movement. It cannot work because the existence of the sect's leadership is threatened by success as much as by failure. And Jenny said, sadly, I agree, Jeff. And I, just to throw in my tuppence, I think that's right. I think that whilst my experience is that I have been able to, I've worked and enjoyed working with comrades in different small, I'll call them small groups. But the leaders tend not to want there to be full unity because that threatens their positions as big fish in a small pool. My words, not theirs. And of course, it's that's not what it is about, is it? It's not about one's position. It's about trying to build a genuine mass representation of the party for to represent us and workers. Okay, Nick, you've got about. Wow. I know you've not got a lot of time left. Sorry about that.
Right. Just looking at the last.
Oh, I see Mary's posted something. Shall I read that out?
Yeah.
I'm new to this. Has anyone mentioned the government scrapping local councils, creating states within a state via free ports and SEZs and so-called devolution, whereby the devolved power will be wielded by unelected, undemocratic, unaccountable overlords and business people with vested interests in 21st century feudalism? I think I heard someone mention techno-feudalism. Just as government can scrap layers of democracy at the drop of a hat when it suits, I can see government deciding to scrap MP elections. So what effect would any new party have? And given what's happening, is there time to build new parties? Everything will be run by hand-picked boards, e.g. integrated care systems or boards, combined authority boards, Freeport boards, all working for big business. Well, phew, that is a last minute so for Nick to respond to. You just have to try and do your best, Nick.
Okay. All right. Well, comrades, look, really excellent discussion. Loads of points ranging from the fundamental and the principle to the question of the tactics and how communists should work. I think Mary's comment at the end is a very good encapsulation of the problems that we face and brings home why the fundamental starting point for all of these discussions is: what is the nature of the present system? Can it be turned into something that will benefit working class people, the working class? And I'm talking about the international working class. Or is it something that actually will continue to destroy and undermine even the limited democracy that we have won under bourgeois democracy? If you look at Trump, for example, threatening to stand for a third term in breach of the American Constitution, it just sums it up, that we cannot rely on the capitalist class and capitalist parties and the capitalist system to protect even the right to vote. And we've seen the suppression of voting registration and so on all across the world. Communism, on the other hand, would be the complete extension of democracy. Unlike with capitalism, it would be the complete extension of democracy into every single aspect of life. We would have recallable representatives, revocable representatives, a rotation of functions, no representative being paid more than the people that they're representing. But most importantly, we would have economic democracy, basically common ownership and the abolition of exploitation. So for me, what we've gained through struggle, which is aspects of the welfare state being undermined, elements of democracy which are being undermined, everything that we've gained through struggle is now being threatened with erosion. And of course, we've got an existential crisis, whether that's climate catastrophe or war and nuclear weapons. The very existence of humanity is threatened by this system. Now, we as communists, really, we have to say that. And we have to say it's the system. And we have to get rid of this system. And anything that impedes our ability to do that, we must fight against. And anything that strengthens our ability to do that, we must welcome, and we must take that step. Now, the first thing that I think is necessary is that we have to have a party that says those things. At the moment, we've got, I tend to agree to a degree with Jeff, we have, splits of various so-called revolutionary socialist organizations, which are ideological cults, which insist that you've got to agree with the leadership on what Trotsky said in 1936, or with their interpretation of the class nature of the Soviet Union in the 1930s and when that went from one thing to another. To me, those ideological issues, while interesting, and from a theoretical point of view, I read all of those things and I'm happy to debate and to discuss. But the important thing is, what's our program for changing society? I think Joe Davison asked that question. What is it that brings or should bring Marxists together? It's the program. And the program should be agreed democratically by communists after discussion and debate, in which everybody gets their say. Everybody puts forward their arguments and they're debated, and we agree a party program, and we implement that party program. And of course, it's constantly under review, and it can be changed and it can be revised. But it's a calling card, isn't it? The program is our calling card. I would rather have somebody at this stage in a small organization extolling the virtues of communism and saying how it can be achieved and what it would mean, than having somebody go on Newsnight representing a bigger, newer organization and, for example, as Lawrence has said, supporting the war of NATO in Ukraine, or saying that, of course, we defend the NHS, but then not being able to say how we defend the NHS. How is the NHS to be defended under capitalism when the only answer that the capitalists have is the intrusion of more and more market forces and private investment into the health service? We have to argue for a communist solution. So the first step, in my opinion, is that communists who want a communist party should get together and to discuss. And that's what's happening at the moment with the Forging Communist Unity process. I don't want to exaggerate or get carried away. It's small forces. It's small numbers of communists. But if we can, as I hope, bring about that fusion of those small forces, it will create something greater than the sum of its parts, if you like, and it will attract other individuals who are communists but didn't know where to go, because although, as Jenny has said, some of them, like the SWP, may be attractive because they're there on picket lines and so on, they're also off-putting because of the way that they organise and the lack of internal democracy and the lack of debate and the suppression of dissent and the fact that you don't really have democratic organisation. And that's partly a product of the ideological nature of those organisations and the ego of leaders. Now, if the leaderships were serious about changing society, then the leaders of those organisations would be talking to one another, and they'd be talking to us, and they'd be saying, look, we've tried this on our own for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years, and we haven't got very far. We'd be much better off if we all got together and agreed on a program for the abolition of capitalism and the creation of a new society which aims at communism without duplication. And let's start taking the steps towards that. Now, I don't really have any hope or expectation that the leaders of these organizations will take that step. But there are wonderful, determined socialists, Marxists, communists in those organizations who've stuck it out through thick and thin, and we can appeal to them to try to break from the sectish model. And that's what we must aim for. Now, without going back over all the arguments, just coming back to the question of collective, I don't know who it will draw in, what it will draw in, who will be prominent, who will determine the program. Having a communist party does not mean that communists stand aside from others in the labour movement. It doesn't mean that we stand aside from struggles, whether it's over the NHS or a pay rise or issues of democracy. It means that we engage with other workers who don't agree with us in the struggle to achieve whatever reform it is that we're fighting for, but we proudly proclaim and we don't hide our programme. Why should we? The reformists in the labour movement don't hide their programme, inadequate as it is, and they may try to sweep us away, suppress us, as they will, because they don't like the idea that we are confident and bold and outspoken about the fact that the system needs to be abolished. And the system cannot guarantee a pay rise. It cannot guarantee healthcare for the elderly or the disabled. It cannot guarantee democracy. And they do not want that confrontation with the capitalist class. We do. But in order to win that confrontation, we have to have the majority of the working class behind us, behind a mass communist party. The other issue I'll just flag up for people to discuss and debate. If you go to Socialist Worker, for example, they've got a report on their annual conference, which just took place a couple of weeks ago. If you go to the Prometheus website, you'll have an article from Chris Nynham from Counterfire, both organisations which, apart from the fact that John Rees was, wasn't put on the central committee of the SWP, would still be in the same organisation. But again, you have the same problem as you have with the RCP and the SP, and that is they think that they are the answer. So they're quite happy to support collective or stand independent candidates or have a new party, so long as they maintain their separate entity. What we want is to try to find a way in which the Marxists dissolve their separate organizations and build a bigger, becoming mass communist party, and we fight to win the working class from their reformist misleaders. The only way we can do that is by persuasion, through comradely discussion, through showing in action that we have better tactics, better strategy, better arguments. And actually, the arguments of communism are the common sense of the working class. Most workers, they know that when they go to work, they're being paid a pittance for the profit that they are making their boss. And they would love the idea that they could change the system whereby the boss was not making a profit out of their labour. We need to organise to try to make communist ideas, organisation, more effective, more efficient. And the way to do that is by forming a small group, a small party, and arguing through persuasion and activity to ask people to join us to change society. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nick, and thanks everybody for a very interesting and diverse discussion, which obviously isn't the end of it. I just finished. Thank everybody for attending. Hope you'll join us again. And next meeting will be on the 10th of February. Ian Spencer will be speaking about the crisis in the health and social care systems, which comrades have alluded to tonight and in the chat. So I hope that everybody will come along to that. Thanks very much for attending.